Thanks, by the way, for putting me on straight after lunch when everybody's asleep. Cheers. How are you? I am Brian. Nice to meet you. As you can probably tell by my accent, I'm Irish, but I live in Switzerland. And more importantly than being Irish, I'm from a little town in the bottom called Cork. And that presents a problem, because most Irish people don't understand people from Cork. And I also live in Switzerland, and most people in Europe don't understand people from Switzerland. So I've been told, for God's sake, please slow down when you're talking. So if you can't understand me, throw something at the stage or something, I don't know. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Yes, I am Managing Director across the DACH region for Accenture Song, which is the largest digital agency in the world. But before that, I was client-side for quite a while, and I would describe myself as being a recovering entrepreneur. I was a tech entrepreneur in Silicon Valley in the early 2000s, mid-2000s, where I built and sold a couple of companies. And I was fortunate enough to be there at a time when what we call now was big tech wasn't that big. It was raising money from the same places that we raise money from. Everybody knew one another. And I got to see up close these companies and how they operated, what they did that was different, how they challenged incumbents, and how they behaved. And then I went client-side. So I was in banking, I was in telco, and I raised quite a decent amount of money in an investment fund around artificial intelligence. But enough about me. What I want to talk about is how do you use differentiated products, experiences to drive your top line? We've got about 2,700 seconds and about as many slides, so let's light this candle. Okay, so the market has changed. This is something that we all know. The last 20 years, we've seen the digital revolution. Right? We've seen the physical world and the digital world. We've seen those things fusing together. Technology has been following Moore's law. Technology has been, for the most part, the number of transistors on a chip have been doubling every year, every 2 years. So technology has, and its price has been halving. So technology has been doubling in speed, halving in size, halving in price. What does that mean? Well, technology has been getting more and more and more powerful, more capable, exponentially more powerful, to the extent that the new iPhone 14, for example, has about 120 million times the processing power of the computers in Cape Canaveral that launched the space shuttle. We use it to look at videos of cats, for the most part. The second thing is technology has been getting smaller. So it's been getting embedded into more things. So more aspects of our lives are becoming digitized. So what that means is the internet is no longer, or digital is no longer a thing you look at it on a screen. It's being embedded into our lives. And then it's getting cheaper. So it's getting more accessible to more people. So technology has been exponentially increasing in capability. We have seen more change in the last 20 years than in the previous 100 years. It's an incredible time to be alive. This is genuinely something you will be telling your grandkids about, that you were the last generation to live through the analog times. Times when you used to go to a physical building to take out pieces of paper that represented money, that you used to navigate around the place using pieces of paper, if you're as old as I am, used to own a car, used to drive it yourself. That would be an insane concept to someone in 30, 40 years. It'll be like driving a car with no seatbelts to us. But here's the thing. Technology has been increasing in capability. Up until very recently, our adoption of that technology has not been keeping pace. This is one of the things that we kind of sometimes blur over. The technology is massively increasing in capability, but user behavior has been increasing and accelerating. For example, it took about 75 years for radio to reach 50 million users, and the latest version of Pokemon Go took 17 days to reach 50 million users. So our adoption of new technology is accelerating, but at a linear rate. That was up until 2020. 2020 was the tipping point when it came to consumer behavioral change. And we saw decades in days. So we saw behavior that was previously growing year on year at a nice, slow, steady, predictable linear rate explode. So we saw, for example, 44% of consumers changed how they bank in 2020. You saw in Europe a 684% increase in mobile wallet transactions. At the same time, we saw a 30% decline in ATM transactions. So you saw Europe, particularly, move away from cash very quickly. You saw 52% of consumers that had never used digital self-service start to use it and now prefer it. Adults that had started using digital payments, 40% of them did it for the first time in 2020. And e-commerce was fascinating because e-commerce really represents what I'm talking about is e-commerce, for all of the talk about e-commerce, was 16% of global sales in 2019, and it was growing at 1% a year. So 16% growing at 1%. It went from 16% to 28% in 12 weeks. So we saw over a decade's worth of growth in 12 weeks. And when we have reopening, it moved back a little, but nowhere near where it was before. And we saw whole new industries appear. We saw telemedicine. At the start of 2020, 7% of people said they would use it. At the end of 2020, 87% of people said they would use it, and 62% of those people preferred it. So you've seen billions of capital come into these industries. You've seen these industries go from little startups to pretty large companies with massive amounts of venture capital behind them, and this is really pulling the future forward. How far forward? Well, if you look at the data, the pandemic shifted user behavior 7 years into the future. So in some markets, 10 years into the future. So were it not for the pandemic, it would have taken us another 7 years to get to where we are now in terms of user adoption of new technology. And in this market, experience-led companies dominated the markets. They captured all of the growth. Not some of the growth, pretty much all of the growth. You saw a company I used to work with before, Apple, take 45 years to reach a market cap of $1 trillion. It took 6 months for it to reach 2 trillion market cap, and another 6 months it was 3 trillion market cap. And even now, when the tech stock market is less than ideal, Apple on any given day trades somewhere between 2.3 and 2.5 trillion dollar market cap. What does that allow them to do? It allows them to access capital incredibly cheaply. It allows them to access people, and it allows them to pull the future forward. An example would be Apple can make an acquisition, and on the day it announces the acquisition, the increase in share price usually covers the cost of the acquisition. So they can buy companies for free. So this is kind of what you're competing against sometimes. You see companies like Zoom. Nobody knew what Zoom was at the start of 2020. You had 10 million daily active users. By April, you had 300 million daily active users, and at one point a market cap larger than the 7 largest airlines in the world combined. And you could say, yeah, that's because of the pandemic. Well, that's funny, because Zoom got to over 40% market share in that time. Cisco was about with WebEx. What happened to those guys? So it's really about differentiated customer experience. And I'm going to reiterate this point several times. Seamless customer experience is not enough. It has to be different. Why would I buy from you? What is it about your product or your experience that is different? Not just, it works. That's kind of an expectation. The original gangster, as I call them, of customer experience is Amazon. You saw Amazon grow sales 37% when the retail sector was declining 6%, 75% increase in market cap. They took that revenue and they invested it into the business to widen the gap between themselves and their competitors. You saw them get 6 years worth of fulfillment center growth, shoring up their supply chain in just over 12 months. 299 fulfillment centers opening in 12 months. So what does that mean? Well, they've been so successful at doing what they're doing, they have now captured almost all the growth in the markets that they operate in. For example, over 60% of commerce now happens on marketplaces. So you go to eBay or Taobao or Amazon. That has driven a change in customer behavior. I've worked with a tech company recently where engineers were going to Amazon to try and source parts, really complicated parts, and they were going to Amazon as a first call because that's driven in their brain, that they compare products and services on Amazon. So they've captured marketplace growth. Of the digital ad spend globally, $741 billion spent on digital ad spend, 78.5% of it goes to, well, 4 companies. So these companies have maxed out the growth in the vertical they're in. However, they have shareholders who are looking for growth. They're growth stocks. They're not mature stocks. They're not dividend stocks. So they need to find new growth. And what do they look for? Well, they look for industries that have high customer friction and high value. And they focused on 2. The first one is healthcare, particularly in the US. Very expensive, very high margins, very high customer friction. The second one is financial services. So if you look at Apple this year, for example, Apple made a number of acquisitions. They bought Credit Kudos, as a credit scoring company. They obviously have Apple Pay, which in the US is 78% of all mobile payments is through Apple Pay. They launched Apple Pay later. They launched a high-interest savings account. And they bought MobiWave, who are eliminating EPOS terminals and using iPhones instead. So Apple are making a concerted effort to move into finance. Amazon obviously have Amazon Pay. Amazon are the great aggregator. So what Amazon tend to do is disintermediate the customer experience. They're doing this for insurance in the UK already. You can compare insurance policies. And then they take the customer experience away and then sell it back to you at a premium. And it's a pretty smart model. So they've moved into the space. Google obviously have Google Pay and Google Finance. So these companies are taking finance pretty seriously. And we'll talk about fintech later. Fintech is your friend. These guys are not your friend. I've worked with these companies. They might pretend they're your friend, but they're not really. So what these companies have been really good at doing is changing expectations. They have changed what your users expect from you. And they've changed user behavior pretty dramatically. So in 2020, 48% of people increased their personal online usage. 82% of those people intend to sustain or increase those usage levels online. And we become smarter online. So the average consumer is exposed to 10,500 ads a day online, and they scroll the height of the Empire State Building with their thumb. And 42% of them are using ad blocking software. So this is my kind of roundabout way of saying advertising sucks as a way to differentiate your brand. So previously, the model was you had a commoditized product that you benchmarked against your competitors. You had a commoditized experience that you benchmarked against your competitors. And then, through media, you were able to differentiate your brand. You were able to say that you had the ultimate driving machine, if you were a car that I can't name that I work with. You were able to say that you had whiter whites if you were a detergent manufacturer. Then came the internet, and people started blocking ads, and then they started going to marketplaces to go, are you really? And so commoditized product and trying to differentiate through advertising is becoming less and less and less effective. And if you look at the data, well, the cost of acquiring a customer has increased 60% since 2016. So we have all of these new digital targeting tools, all of these marketing stacks. We have these big tech companies saying we can target the exact customer at the exact place at the right time, still costing more to acquire a customer than it did in 2016, substantially more. So really, that slide looks a bit funny. So what I'm trying to explain is when they've changed customer experiences, they have changed perception. So here, I'll point this out because that was black at one point, you have your direct competitors. Your customers are not looking at your direct competitors. They are not benchmarking your app against your direct competitor's app. They are benchmarking your app against, well, experiential competitors. What are companies that are offering substitutes for the things that you do? What are the companies that are taking parts of your value chain and providing that, making that experience that little bit better, that little bit slicker? And then there is the perceptual competitors. Perceptual competitors are what are the companies that are driving user expectation? And that is, for example, TikTok. The average TikTok user now spends 28.5 hours a month on the platform. They have drastically changed how we expect to consume media, to the extent that even the likes of Netflix is getting very worried about it. We expect it to be hyper-personalized, we expect it to be super relevant, and we expect it to be endlessly scrollable. So these are the guys that are setting the expectations gap. And I have worked at quite a lot of large companies, and it used to drive me slightly crazy when we used to benchmark ourselves against our direct competitors, because they're not the companies that are setting the expectations. When designing customer experiences, we need to benchmark against these guys. These are the guys that ultimately have a habit of vertically integrating. So these are the guys that we need to close that gap, because the last best experience a customer has anywhere becomes their minimum expectation for the experience that they want everywhere. They don't go, well, that was a really nice experience on Airbnb. Oh, well, into my banking app now. They don't. They assume that the user experience is going to be as seamless. They assume that everything's going to work. And I know that that's a massive challenge in legacy organizations, because we have to connect an awful lot of systems. We have to get our front ends right. There's a huge amount in design, but it is critically important. So to kind of summarize, big tech moving into finance. 2020 has changed user behavior. It has changed user expectation. Advertising sucks. So the need for transformation is accelerating. We've heard that over the last 2 days. We have fantastic technology, as you've seen over the last 2 days, to be able to do that. Well, there was 1.7 trillion spent on transformation before the pandemic, and 84% of them failed. So why did that happen? It's not the technology's fault. The technology, as we said, is getting more and more powerful. It's more capable. Why is this not working? Well, The reason it's not working, from my experience of observing this in a lot of companies, big and small, is most transformations are essentially applying 21st century technology to a 20th century business function. We're buying a Formula One car and we're driving it to the shop. So what we're doing is we're taking the existing business functions and we're digitizing them, or digitalizing them, which is my pet hate word. We're taking them and we're making it a digital process. So we're taking the deposit book and we're moving it online. And those things are important. It's a good first step. I'm not knocking them, but it will not give you differentiated product experiences. It will not give you differentiated propositions. We really need to reframe how we think. So if you look at approaches to digital transformation, it's typically new technology, new skill sets. We buy new technology, we hire some people, or we train up people to use the new technology. And that seems to make sense, right? But the part that's missing, and the part that always exists in the companies that do this right, is the mindset. How do you shift your thinking around what you do as an organization from we are a bank with these are the things that we do within the bank to what is the thing that you're enabling for a customer? And most importantly, most digital transformations need to start with digital strategy. The point of strategy, at its simplest form, is competitive differentiation. Whereas most of the digital strategies that you see that start with technology transformation tend to be about capital efficiency. They tend to be about how do we make our back office more efficient? How do we eliminate the number of people in this process? Those things are really important because they release the capital that allows you to invest in new things, in growth, in what are the things that define, if you are sitting on a marketplace as an organization next to other companies, why are they going to choose yours? It's not going to be your advertising, so it has to be what are you offering that's different? And that's the mindset that needs to be applied to transformation first. I hate the term North Star, but I can't think of anything else. But it is a North Star for an organization. So thinking of it this way, there's traditional business, there's transitional business, and there's transformational business. Traditional business is, well, we had a phone book. Transitional is, well, we got that phone book and we moved it online. Transformational is, what is the customer need? What's the customer really trying to do with our business? And how can we apply new technology? How can we apply innovation? How can we partner with fintechs to do that in a different way? And then you get stuff like predictive search that takes in data, that can take in metadata to understand where you are, what people like you have searched for, and can give you the result before you know you needed it, because the customer need here was information. It wasn't a phone book. So if you look at a number of, we're in a hotel right now, companies that have done this pretty well, like a hotel previously used to call a travel agent. We made it worse by moving it online because then you didn't have a travel agent who actually told you what the hotel was like. And we moved online hotel booking. And then transformational companies are companies like Airbnb that look at the customer need. What does the customer need? High quality accommodation in a city that I'm in. And they've been so successful at doing this. And it's actually designers that set up Airbnb. They're not technology people. They've been so successful at doing this. This has become the most valuable travel brand in the world that owns no real estate. Over 70% of traffic to Airbnb is direct. Airbnb has become the thing you do when you go somewhere. I got an Airbnb in Dubai. Nobody says I got an Expedia in Dubai. And Expedia spend billions a year on advertising. So Airbnb have differentiated their proposition so much that people just use, that's how they think when they think of accommodation. And it's very defensible. Again, traditional, I remember, unfortunately, these days, when I was living in Ireland and it was raining and nobody would stop, was flagging down a taxi. Transitional, you see some of them around in Dubai, is predictive taxi finding apps. Connect the taxi with the user. Transformational is what Uber and Lyft have been doing, which is ride sharing. The customer need is transport. The customer need is not a taxi. So how do you use technology to transform that experience? How do you use the rich data, the massive processing power that that thing you have in your pocket does, combined with the cloud to create something radically different? So if you look at your business, obviously there's more product lines. Traditional, you have marketing, sales, service. Transitional was, well, we took the marketing and we moved it online. We digital marketing. We used new technology, new tools. Sales, well, we took the sales and we moved them online and we did e-commerce. Service was, well, we migrated customers from the branch to digital self-service. Transformational is orchestration of the business around customer purpose, and that sounds like a fluffy word, but it's really not. What's the customer trying to do, and how do we fulfill that way in a way that our competitors can't? I cannot tell you how many CEOs I speak to that say, hey, we want a culture like Google. And I'm like, really? Do you? Have you a market cap of $2 trillion, and do you have bring your dog to work days? I don't think you do. How do you lean into your culture? Everybody's about cultural change. Yes, there are aspects of your culture you need to change. You do not want to be Meta. Meta is all about move fast, break things. Okay, you're a bank, don't break things. That's not what you do. You're actually, well, you have a risk function. You have customer trust. How do you make those things that your customers want from you assets? Stop trying to be big tech. You're not big tech. Try and be yourself, just a more technologically enabled version of yourself. So your brand has existed. I worked at a bank that was 235 years old. It had sometimes a 235-year-old culture, but it took me a year and a half of banging my head against a wall, thinking I knew the answer, to realize, actually embrace that culture. That culture is embedded in parts of the community. How do we use that to create something that big tech can't possibly hope to match? And then create a digital experience from that. So it's really a transition from CX to BX. CX, we talk about customer experience, seamless customer experience. Hopefully, I've been clear enough to point out that that is not enough, but it is important. CX is optimizing customer touch points. How do we make our call centers more efficient? We reduce average handling time. We reduce call center wait times. How do we make our branches more efficient? How do we make our marketing more efficient? Those things release capital for the next part. They are not something you pick up and hand as a dividend to your shareholder. They are something that you reinvest into the business. So how do you optimize customers' ability to achieve what they're using your organization to do? And how do you do it in a way that's different? And the companies that manage this, as long as we've been looking at the data, are hugely differentiated in terms of profits. Over 7 years, we've been studying this. They're over 6x performance in profitability. And that's quite interesting because the companies that are focused on efficiency should be increasing their or decreasing their cost-income ratio. They should be more profitable, but the companies that are focused on reinvesting into the business to drive growth, they're the companies that are winning. So where do you start? I was pretty terrible in college for the first time I went, so I had to remember things in sort of in pillars because I spent more time on the social side of college than the studying side of college. I probably should have paid attention more. But I use 3 letters quite a lot, is perspective, practice, and performance. What does that mean? Well, perspective is how do you view yourself as a brand? How do you view yourself as an organization? How do you do that from a customer's perspective? So you define your brand purpose with a small p. I don't mean spend the national debt of a small country with a creative agency who go off and come up with this beautiful brand campaign and a lovely little tagline that you put in the end of all your ads and maybe a little bit of music. It's an utter waste of time. It's an utter waste of money. This is internal, in your organization, with your team, and ideally, some customers in the room. And figure out what it is that you do that your competitors don't do. What is it that you do that big tech can't do? Why are your customers your customers? And you find some amazing things there. You find some things of, well, in the case of the bank I worked with, it was familial. I had it because my mother had it and she worked there and it was part of the community. That's what the purpose of the organization was. And when you define it, don't create some big grand brand purpose. I'll give you an example of 2, and I have a favorite word to the presentation earlier, but I'm not allowed to use it on stage. So one is Zoom. Zoom is very simple. Make communications frictionless. That's what they do. It's pretty simple. Then you've got WeWork. To elevate the world's consciousness. What in God's name are they talking about? And I had a professor of mine in NYU Stern, who I know pretty well, who did a bit of a study with us on I had to change the wording, on the mission statement nonsense level versus the stock performance post-IPO. And I had to kind of, obviously this is my favorite word, but I can't use it. The ones that were pretty straightforward, they performed pretty well. The ones that were total, nonsense, we'll use that word, total nonsense, well, they didn't. And you can see this now in this great implosion of the stock market. The tech companies that aren't really, really clear on what they do and what problem they solve for a customer are the ones that people are confused, and they're trying everything. They're throwing the kitchen sink at loads of things. The companies that are very clear on what they do, they seem to be doing okay. Google is make the world's information accessible to everyone. That's what they do, and they do. So they index and make the world's information accessible to everything. Everything they do aligns behind that. So it's really keep it as simple and as straightforward as you possibly can. So we are in the, what business are you in? That's it. That's all you need to define. It sounds simple. It's not quite that simple, but it's a good place to start. So once you've perspective done, you figure out what business you're in, practice. Practice is my favorite part, and this is clearly not an Accenture slide because it's far too ugly, is where do you allocate your resource for competitive advantage? If you think of a customer journey as a clock, pre-purchase is 12 to 4. Purchase is 4 to 8. Post-purchase, 8 to 12. Pick one. Pick one, double down, overinvest. Be average at the other ones. Do not try and be the best at all of this, because what you'll end up with is exhausted mediocrity. Everybody will be working very, very hard, everybody's optimizing everything, and you'll get a experience that's a 4 out of a 10. The best brands I've ever worked with understand this. I was the idiot in 2011 who was telling Apple that they need to move to e-commerce. And Apple, because it was the future, right? It was where we should be. And Apple very politely told me, no, go away. And the reason they did that is they figured out, actually, they reallocated capital from pre-purchase, where some brands can differentiate. If you're Nike, knock yourself out. Best advertising in the world, fantastic sponsorship. Assume you are not Nike. If you were Apple, what they were able to do is take about 38 billion of marketing spend every year and reallocate it into purchase. And what did they do? Well, they opened Apple stores when everybody else was going online. They spent, when I was in Vodafone and we owned Verizon, we were spending about 250,000 to 450,000 on a store. At the same time, Apple were spending 9 to 10 million on a store. They were training their staff to a level that's above the Ritz-Carlton, so that the NPS in their stores is 88, which is incredible. If you remember what an electronics store was like before Apple, it was a pretty horrible place to be. Loads of wires and kind of a guy behind the counter reading comic books, and you didn't really know what was going on. Apple took high fashion, created this amazing temple to the organization, and they carry that through everything they do. They have teams that design the packaging to the extent that there's a whole second-hand market selling boxes for iPhones. They are amazing at design. This is what they do. They're fantastic at it. They don't spend anywhere near as much as Samsung do in advertising, but they're a far more valuable brand. Starbucks is a really good example, even though it's kind of old and we all know it now. Starbucks was revolutionary when it came out. It had a coffee experience that you could sit there all day on relatively clean couches and have free Wi-Fi, and you could work from there, and it was so different to the small coffee shops that were there before, and they've carried that into their digital experience. They've really focused on it, so on any given day, Starbucks usually carries between 1.6 and 1.9 billion on deposit in their mobile app, which is bigger than some banks have. And Tesla don't spend anything on advertising, famously. They spend a bit on PR, even though they lie about it. Their purchase experience is efficient but terrible. You go online, you configure your car, you can pick 5 colors. You turn up in a barn, and some guy who looks about 12 says, your car's over there, and you go pick it up. Not exactly like buying a Porsche. However, post-purchase, they have a supercharging network, which, when Tesla started, was free. They have a servicing experience in the app. You book the experience. The technician comes to your house. You don't drop it off and wait. They have over-the-air updates. The car adds new functionality every 2 weeks. That is the reason that they have a cult at this point of owners who refer other owners, and why they're growing. We're now the best-selling car in Europe, the Model Y. So really, if there's anything you can take away from this slide, please have a bias. You need to invest in all of this, but really pick one and overinvest. Make that your promise to your customers. Make something radically different. So that's perspective, practice, performance. Well, performance is, how do you structure your teams to do this? How do you structure your organization to do this? And this gets into the sticky world of culture. Well, which team do you think is going to win that race? So this is typically how organizations structure. They have a product team that looks at what their competitors' products are doing, interest rates in the market. They come out with a product. They hand it to technology, and they say, build that. Something's usually lost in translation along the way. And then that's handed to the web team, put a front end on that, design it, make it look pretty. And then it's handed to the marketing going, here's this, can you wrap this in tinfoil and make it look pretty and sell it? And then marketing get blamed when it doesn't work. Whereas the companies that do this differently restructure. They don't have silos in the organization anymore. They don't have a product team. They have a product lead, obviously, but they create cross-functional teams based around the customer need. What's the customer trying to do? This is not about this. It is not about product features. It is not about building loads of stuff into your mobile app and having a list. It's about common KPI frameworks. How do you reward technology with the same KPIs as the business? Technology usually has KPIs and reward around stability, things working, not falling over. The business is around products. How many products can I launch this year? And you always get this friction. If you change from business-driven metrics to customer behavioral-driven metrics, what does that mean? Well, business-driven metrics is how many things have I got in my app? How many products have I launched this year? Customer behavioral metrics is, did it change the user behavior when we launched that? If it didn't, can we kill it? So hopefully that has been helpful. I hope people didn't take pictures and then get in trouble with Accenture. But thank you very much for your time.